Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Ahlulbayt Live on Ahlulbayt TV, where we're talking about the nature of the mind and the soul according to Islam and also contemporary thinkers. And you were just about, before I had to cut you, talking about the realm of Alast, this realm where the souls they testify to the oneness of Allah.
So there's the verse in the Quran in Surah Araf, verse 172, and it goes like this, that it says, "And when your Lord brought forth from the children of Adam from their backs their descendants, and made them bear witness against their own selves, am I not your Lord? They said, yes, we bear witness." So the verse continues, "Lest you should say on the day of resurrection, surely we were heedless of this." Now there are differences, there's a difference of opinion about what this means, but the more popular opinion is that this event did occur,
right,
sometime before we came into existence. There's another opinion that this is referring to this life, when we come out of, we come from our parents and as we grow up. Because if you look here, the verse says, it doesn't say from the loins of Adam. It says from the children of Adam, from their loins or from their backs.
Right.
So it's not from Adam himself, but from the children. So some scholars say that this means the children of Adam means in this life.
Right.
It wasn't in a prior life from Prophet Adam himself. And so they have that opinion. So there's a difference of opinion. But it seems like the prevailing opinion is it did happen in a prior life.
Right.
Now, the question has been asked, if we did make this covenant that we bear witness that Allah is our Lord, why have we forgotten it if it did occur?
Yeah.
And this is something that scholars have asked. If it did occur in that life, why is it that we've forgotten it? We should remember it. But the narrations from the Imams tell us, there's a narration from Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, that the event occurred. Its effect has remained on us, but the knowledge of the event occurring has been forgotten.
Right, right.
So if you think about it like this, if you were younger and you cut yourself in your hand, and as you grew older, you could see the scar on your hand. Yeah. You can see the effect, although you cannot remember what happened.
Yeah.
Because you forget certain things, but the effect remains.
Yeah.
So the verse would indicate that Tawheed and belief in Allah is central to our nature. And so when trying to understand human nature, we should not ignore this aspect. And this is something I want to discuss in the second show. The fact that human nature has belief in God central to it. And this is even shown by modern science. In fact, they say that it evolved through Darwinistic means.
Right.
That somehow, for some reason, this evolved. And I don't think that's the case. I think this fitrah that we have was designed and put into us. It could not have evolved. And there are reasons for believing that. And we can look at that in the second show,
because I've heard there are also sort of theories about, people have come up with theories about how there's a part of the brain that believes in God, or it's some sort of gene that is a God-believing gene, or something.
I think that's just for PR. I mean, I think that's just because it sounds cool, or it sounds, it's something to draw in the layperson. There's a God gene.
Right.
I don't think there's a God gene. I don't think they've ever discovered a gene which is a God gene. But the mind, the brain is inclined towards believing in God. The brain does see design in the universe.
Yeah.
The minds of children are inclined towards believing that there's a supernatural entity.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of evidence for this. And inshallah, later on we'll talk about that.
Inshallah. And then talking about the ruh, the spirit, entering Adam, which you have mentioned just shortly earlier, and you've quoted also Imam Ali from National Balagha, and I remember reading this as well. I found this quite interesting when it says Imam Ali is describing the creation of man, and he says then He, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, blew into it this form of clay out of His spirit, whereupon it took the pattern of a human being with a mind that governs him, intelligence which he makes use of. And I thought that was interesting, that that this creation was made out of clay. So it must have had some form, but it was not the form of a human being until it's given the mind.
Yes, it could be that here the Imam is differentiating between the animals and human beings.
Right.
Because he goes on to talk about intelligence that is made use of, and he talks about that because of this we can differentiate between taste and smell, colors, and so on.
Yeah.
Perhaps what this shows us is that the human being is not just a machine, but this soul gives the human being awareness. It gives the human being consciousness, so the human being is aware of these things rather than just being a machine. The reason why I actually quoted this narration or put this down for the show is because I came across someone, a Muslim, a Shia, who's very knowledgeable and doesn't believe in a soul. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. So I thought we need to prove to people like that, that Islam does say that we do have a body and a soul. He believes that when you die, some people will just be in the form of a body which will be resurrected.
Right.
Others, when they die, they have no more awareness anymore. And there are some scholars who have had that opinion, but I don't want to go into that because it will change the subject.
Okay.
However, it seems like the proper opinion is that we do have a body and a soul.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. And then descriptions of death and the afterlife also indicate the soul is other than the physical body.
Yeah.
And then you're going to look at the contemporary kind of, again, European thinkers.
What I want to cover next, and we might not have time to cover this in sufficient depth or detail, is how do we prove to people, to materialists, that we do indeed have a soul. We're not just made up of matter. And I've got down 10 points, and to cover the 10 points might take a whole show in itself, or even more than a whole show.
Yeah.
So we have this belief amongst the modern academics that we're just made up of matter.
Yeah.
And that's about it. And this has been a view that's been held for quite some time, a few decades maybe a bit more than that. And I came across this book, someone recommended it to me, The Waning of Materialism, written by 23 philosophers. And it's published by the Oxford University Press, The Waning of Materialism.
Very interesting.
And it's interesting. I don't recommend that people buy the book because it's very difficult unless they're really into their philosophy and they understand the language.
So they could take it out of a library, inshallah.
They could, and if they think they can handle it, then they can read it.
But that's interesting because we have been dominated by materialism in various different
We
forms.
have been, and now you have this book which talks about the waning, that materialism is on the wane. And that modern research is showing in philosophy and in science that perhaps there's more than just matter which exists.
Right.
There's a very famous philosopher, Thomas Nagel. He's very highly respected amongst the atheists because he's an atheist.
Okay.
And he's a staunch atheist. In fact, he's so staunch, he says that I don't want God to exist. I hate the idea of God. And he said that a few decades ago. He's got a book which was published a few weeks ago, in fact, only a few weeks ago. The title of the book is Mind and Cosmos, Why the Materialist Neo-Darwinian Conception of Nature is Almost Certainly False. So he's talking about how the materialist view is false.
Okay.
And also the title talks about Neo-Darwinian concept.
Yeah.
People would need to know there's a difference between the old Darwinian concept, Neo-Darwinism. Evolution is not that simple.
Yeah.
People just think there's just evolution. There's punctuated equilibrium, which is another theory, saltationism, Lamarckism. So if people want to study evolution, they need to realize there are different theories.
Right.
It's not as straightforward as saying, I believe in evolution. Which version of evolution?
Yeah. Yeah.
And people need to look into that, because I get a lot of criticism when I criticize the neo-Darwinian theory. People say, well, you're completely against evolution, and say, well, that's neo-Darwinism.
Yeah.
There could be another theory out there.
Because these Darwinism was really that, you know, thinkers who came after Darwin developed new...
Because they realized that Darwin's theory was not in line with what biology teaches us. It wasn't in line with DNA. Because Darwin thought the cell was just sludge, or it was just very simple matter,
right,
which wasn't complex. And then when the biologists realized that the cell itself is this very complex entity with DNA making up its basis, and DNA is what determines our physical being, then they realize we need to change things.
Right. Okay.
But that's not to say that me saying that I criticize neo-Darwinism doesn't mean that I think evolution did occur. That's another subject altogether.
Right,
I think we can talk about another time.
So anyway, here we have a leading atheist who is starting to challenge materialist theories.
He's challenging it for two reasons, from what I understand. He's challenging the fact that Darwinian evolution could have led to what we have today. Darwinian mechanism. And without going into detail, we're talking about replication, survival of the fittest, and so on. Those things which lead to evolution. He's challenging that.
Okay.
He doesn't believe in that. And there's the intelligent design movement.
Natural selection, etc.
And so on.
Yeah.
It doesn't lead to evolution for whatever reasons.
Right.
And we can talk about this later on. That's one reason why he's challenging. He's also challenging the idea that the only thing that exists is matter. He's saying that maybe there's more than just matter. Maybe there's this other entity, something immaterial.
Right.
So he's challenging the materialist view on two accounts. First of all, that Darwinism isn't a sufficient explanation for the creatures that we see around us.
Okay.
It could not have produced such highly designed creatures. Maybe there's something else to it. And the other thing he's challenging is this notion that only matter exists. To him, maybe there's something other than matter. And the reasons that he gives, or the reason that he gives, is consciousness. Now, let's look at this. Consciousness. What is consciousness? We as human beings are aware of ourselves.
Yeah.
We know that we exist. So like I said, René Descartes said that he could doubt everything. He could doubt the existence of the material world. Does this external world that I see around me exist? Mm-hmm. He said maybe a demon created this and is tricking me into believing that this does exist.
Yeah.
But he said I cannot doubt myself. I do exist. So consciousness seems to be the driving force behind the anti-materialist movement.
Right.
I mean, if you look at the book, The Waning of Materialism, the first thing that's mentioned as an argument or as a reason not to believe in the materialist worldview is consciousness, that we are conscious beings.
Just to, again, be a bit difficult, it has been argued that Descartes, we could say it was strictly dualistic in a way, or it was strictly, he was strictly focusing on knowing God purely through the mind, through the consciousness. But it was this Cartesian split, in a way, between the mind and the material world that gave rise to materialism after that. So it seems that we're going in circles where Descartes came up with this way of knowing the ultimate reality, God, through the mind. But obviously to have certainty of knowing God, you first of all have to have certainty that you exist, your mind exists. Okay, so anyway, he came up with that idealism, as they call it, or it's like idealism.
I think it's better to say that idealism is the view that the mind is dominant, or ideas are dominant, and one extreme of that would be that only the mind exists and matter doesn't exist. The famous philosopher George Berkeley, he believed in that. He believed that the external world doesn't exist and only the mind exists. That's a minority view. In today's world, we have the dualists who believe in body and mind.
But they say this is given rise to the very materialism that we are.
I personally don't think so. I think what gave rise to the materialism was the attitude of the religious people to science in Europe. So we have the persecution of Galileo for believing that the sun was at the center of the solar system. And so it was the attitude of the religious hierarchy to religion, to science, to science, and that's what gave rise to materialism. I think that's one thing
that's a good point.
I don't think it was actually the dualistic views, because dualism has been there since the beginning. All the civilizations had dualists amongst them. It's only in the modern world that we see physicalism becoming the more dominant theory. Dualism has always been around, and even great thinkers and scientists have been dualists. Isaac Newton was a dualist. So I don't think it's Descartes' dualism which led to physicalism. I think it was the attitude of the religious leaders in opposition to science which led to physicalism.
So anyway, leading thinkers are moving beyond materialism. And you were talking about the primacy of consciousness.
So we have consciousness. Now, what can we say about consciousness? I mean, what more can we say? There's a lot that can be added. How can we use consciousness to show that a soul does exist? We have this philosopher who's got a background in neuroscience. His name is David Chalmers. And he's done a lot of work in this area. And he's coined this phrase, the hard problem of consciousness. He says that there's the easy problem of consciousness and the hard problem. And he's a philosopher with a background in neuroscience. So he says that when you study the brain, now anyone out there who's studying neuroscience should become aware, or it's good for them to become aware of this theory of David Chalmers. He says, when you study the brain as a neuroscientist, what you're solving in regards to consciousness is the easy problem. In other words, the easy problem is this: what areas of the brain lead to certain conscious experiences? So you could pinpoint in this area, when this part of the brain lights up, that's when you smell something. In another place, if this area of the brain is active, that's when you see something. So you're linking the conscious experiences to certain parts of the brain. So he says this is called the easy problem. What parts of the brain lead to the different conscious experiences? And he says that we can solve. We will get to a stage where we will know which parts of the brain lead to which behavior, to which conscious experiences that we feel and that we perceive. So you can link the areas of the brain to perception. He says that can be done. However, what we can never understand is how does the brain produce consciousness in the first place? Does that make sense, or is that difficult to understand?
Why I hesitated was when you said, how does the brain produce consciousness? Because I don't know if the brain doesn't produce.
That's what he says. We can never work out if the brain will produce consciousness or does produce consciousness. He says, as much as you would study the brain is nothing but matter. And matter is not the same as this conscious experience that we have. You can study the brain as much as you want, and you will never see consciousness in the brain. You might see patterns and different electrical signals moving around, and you could look at them, and you could say, I can tell from these patterns that this person is smelling something, or this person is seeing something, or this person is thinking of something, but you will never see consciousness in that in the brain itself. And he says we will never get to the stage where we could work out how matter creates this consciousness. And he calls this the hard problem,
Right.
meaning we'll never solve it. It will be like this forever. Science will never work out how consciousness comes about from matter.
Right, right.
So this is the hard problem of consciousness, and materialism, according to David Chalmers, will never ever tell us how consciousness comes about. Now, in his opinion, consciousness is another substance. You have matter, and then you have this other entity, consciousness, and we could say maybe that's a soul. He doesn't go as far as saying soul because he wants to keep away from the religious side of things. He doesn't want to sound as a religious person. But we could say maybe it's a soul, this other substance that he's talking about. He says you have the matter, and then you need some other substance to cause this conscious experience.
Right. That's interesting, because I know that even some Muslim scholars have described the soul as a substance. The soul has been described as a substance.
It would be a substance.
Right.
I think you would have to say it's a substance. If you said it's not, then what is it? If it's a nothing.
Yeah.
It's an immaterial substance.
Yeah.
It's a substance, but it's not material.
Yeah.
It's an immaterial
Yeah.
substance.
So that seems to correspond with what he has, or what this person has arrived at.
Yes.
You said that who is it who arrived at that?
David Chalmers.
He arrived at that.
He says consciousness
is a substance.
Is a substance of some sort. And he
Right.
said it's fundamental to existence, to reality itself. That you have matter and you have another substance called consciousness
Right.
of some sort. And we could say that's a soul.
I've heard it also be said by another scientist some years ago. Her surname was Samantha Norton. I don't know if you've heard
I
of her.
haven't heard of her.
Yeah, and she also said that the one thing that contemporary scientists have not resolved is this issue of consciousness. And everything else, yes, they can tick boxes and kind of tie those ends. But the issue of consciousness remains.
Yeah. I think I was listening to a lecture. In fact, there's a book by John Barrow, professor of physics at Cambridge University. And he's got a list of things that science hasn't solved and may never solve.
Okay.
And I think this is one of them.
Right.
Of consciousness. He's a theist, by the way. He believes in God, John Barrow.
Okay.
So we have this problem of consciousness. Now, the philosophers, they talk about something called qualia. With consciousness, you have qualia. Now, I must say, before I continue that, I understand that this may not be the easiest of subjects for some people, and it might not be to their liking, but I'm not going to talk about this throughout the whole series.
Yeah.
We'll stick to this for this section only. So what is qualia? They say qualia is subjective experiences. For example, the smells, the colors. They have their own varieties. What I might smell might not be the same as what another person smells. They have their different intensities. Now, this is a problem. Where do these subjective experiences come from? There's this thought experiment that's been put forward that if you have a colorblind scientist, a scientist who's colorblind, that scientist can study the brain as much as they want. They will still never have that experience of color.
Yes.
They can study it as much as they want. They will still not have that experience. They will never get that knowledge. Knowledge of matter, of the material world, will not give you the qualia. It will not give you that subjective experience of color, of sound, of taste, of touch. You can study it exhaustively. You will never have that experience. Now let's say that the scientist wasn't colorblind. They were put into a room which did not allow them to see color. And they were stuck in that room since they were born.
Right.
And they were studying the brain. They could study everything about the brain and they wouldn't know what color was like. Then they were taken out of that room and then they would know what color was like. They would know what color was like. They would have that subjective experience after coming out of that room. So we have this problem of qualia. Where does it come from? And can knowing about matter help us understand or help us know where qualia comes from itself. Does it come from matter or not?
I often refer to the issue of dreams because, again, you can't, if someone's having a dream or seeing a dream, you can't see what dream they're having. I mean, again, we've got those machines that will say, oh, that bit's lighted up, so that means they're having a dream. But you can't see the dream that they're seeing or experience the dream that they're experiencing. I find this quite interesting.
I read about this, in fact, in The Waning of Materialism. This is an argument that's being put forward, but I'm not convinced, I have to be honest. Maybe in the future, if you could study the brain to its limits, you could see the dream. I don't know. Unless the dream is an experience of the soul without being an experience of the brain, which I doubt, because when you do wake up, you do remember the dream. So the dream is stored in your brain. So you could you could find out what dream they were having through the brain. It might be possible if you had a lot of knowledge. It might be possible.
Interesting. Well, again, sadly, we're running out of time. But just to clarify one thing before we have to wrap up. Point 4, you've put P-zombie.
P-zombie. This is another thing that David Chalmers has promoted. P-zombie means philosophical zombie. Zombies in popular culture are human beings that come out from the grave. But in philosophy, a zombie is a human being without consciousness. So David Chalmers says, could you imagine God creating a human being that doesn't have consciousness? And we'll have to stop there.
We'll have to stop. Thank you very much. Fascinating discussion, and I hope our viewers have enjoyed it. We know it's been a little bit technical, but fascinating and necessary, I think. And I want to thank Brother Ali Rahim, and inshallah I will be back again on Tuesday. Assalamu alaikum.